Alright, now I'll admit it, I'm a double crosser. But I blame my dad. My mom couldn't help but give me an X chromosome. It's all she has. But it was my dad that gave me his X chromosome instead of Y. There really was a 50-50 chance. But I'll forgive him. There's really nothing wrong with being a double crosser. It just means I'm female. But the fact that some people are double crossers and others aren't means that these chromosomes behave a little bit differently than the rest we learned about in the genetics chapter. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to use a Punnett square to predict an offspring's genotype and phenotype for sex-linked traits, and compare and contrast how traits on autosomes and sex chromosomes are passed down. Unlike other pairs of chromosomes, the sex chromosomes, the X and the Y, really aren't truly homologous. In females, the X chromosomes can be considered homologous because it has a partner, and just like other homologous chromosomes, has pairs of the same genes but just with different versions. This has some very important implications in the way that they're passed down, which we'll look at in just a minute. Even though the X and the Y are called sex chromosomes, only one of them contains genes that actually have to do with gender, and that's the Y chromosome. The only genes it contains are the genes that code for male characteristics. The X chromosome, however, contains few, if any, genes that code for being female. It's still sort of a mystery to scientists what turns on the genes for female development. We used to think that everyone started out female, and if the Y chromosome was present, the SRY gene coded for a transcription factor that turned on other male genes. But now we know that there's genes that actively turn on female development, so it's still an area of pretty active research. We don't talk too much about genes on the Y chromosome because they're specific only to males and seem to code only for male characteristics. So any gene that's there gets expressed wherever appropriate, the brain or the sex organs. There's no dominant or recessive, codominant or incompletely dominant. Males just get one copy and that's it. It works the same way with their X chromosome, except it's possible for those genes to be considered dominant and recessive, because females do have two copies. So for example, the sex-linked trait colorblindness is considered recessive, because females need two copies of the colorblind gene to actually be colorblind. But because males have just one X chromosome, if they get one recessive copy of the colorblind gene, there's nothing to mask it, and so it gets expressed. Those males are colorblind. When doing a Punnett square to predict the possible offspring of a couple, if we know the gene is sex-linked, use X's and Y's, like this Punnett square, to show that it's sex-linked. This is important because of how sex-linked traits manifest themselves differently sometimes in males and females. If the sex-linked trait is recessive, a lowercase superscript is used. And if it's dominant, an uppercase superscript is used. Don't worry, I'll tell you if a trait is sex-linked or not. So let's look at a Punnett square for a bleeding disorder called hemophilia. This is a cross between a male who has hemophilia and a female who's considered a carrier for hemophilia. A carrier is someone who does not have the trait themselves, but is able to pass it down to their offspring. So let's see how that happens. When we look at the possible offspring after making the Punnett square, we see a 50-50 chance of being male versus female. So here's two XYs out of a possible 4, and here's two XXs out of a possible 4. And depending on the sex chromosomes, it'll tell us if the person has hemophilia or not, and it's different in males and females. Again, that's why we need to write out the X's and Y's to show the sex-linked trait. So half of the females carry the hemophilia trait. She herself would need 2 copies in order to show symptoms of hemophilia. And half of the females would actually have hemophilia themselves because they got a hemophilia gene from their mother and also a hemophilia gene from their father. Of the males, only one has hemophilia and one is totally unaffected. So this male has hemophilia because he does not have a dominant trait to mask this recessive trait. If in females, the way the genes are expressed on the X chromosomes is a little strange. Only one of them is expressed in each cell. but which one is expressed is entirely random. The diagram on the right shows what happens to females' X chromosomes. This gene is a made-up sex-linked trait for either red or blue skin. This female is heterozygous. Her father has blue skin and her mother has red or a mixture skin. The P and the M next to these X's stand for paternal and maternal. So paternal has to do with the father and maternal has to do with the mother. So when the egg is fertilized and the individual begins by dividing a few times, or the individual begins by dividing a few times, but then after a few divisions, one of the X chromosomes becomes inactivated. And so you can see here in this second round of divisions, one of the X chromosomes turns into this dense little dot. And what that is a chromosome that's condensed so much that RNA polymerase will never be able to find its way to any of the promoter sequences on any of the DNA that makes up that chromosome. And so transcription of those genes will never happen. So this very dense chromosome in females is called a bar body. So in each one of a female's cells, one of the X chromosomes has genes that are expressed, and one X chromosome turns into this very dense bar body. The gene on the other chromosome then is expressed, and so it creates either blue or red proteins. These cells then continue to divide and create sort of a patchwork or mosaic pattern of gene expression. If this was color blindness, the reason that a heterozygous female would not be colorblind is because chances are enough of the cells that eventually became her eyes would express the non-colorblind or normal protein. Because males only need one sex-linked allele, whether the condition is dominant or recessive, males tend to have more sex-linked disorders than females, though we've seen it is possible for females to get sex-linked disorders. A couple of common sex-linked disorders are red-green color blindness, hemophilia, and a degenerative muscle disease called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So let's see if you can figure out what's going on to this cat. Black and orange fur on cats is carried on the X chromosome. The white color is coded for by a totally different gene. Males can either have black patches on their white fur, or they can have orange patches on their white fur. So what's going on with this cat that it has both black and orange patches? What's the cat's gender, and how did it get those black and orange patches? So now that you're finished with the lecture, don't forget to go back and take a look at the quiz and answer the questions. So we'll take a little preview of the quiz. Here we go.